rigid insulation is an entirely different category of insulation. And this stuff comes in sheets, and it's hard, it's rigid, okay? You can screw it to the walls, screw it to the floor, screw it to your roof deck. This can be a pretty effective material, okay? And one thing I didn't mention in the fiberglass bats lecture or portion of the video is that since those are all pre-sized to 16 or 24 inch bays, that doesn't help you very much if you're trying to insulate an old house, okay? Because there was no such thing as layout back then, okay? They didn't have to break a sheet of plywood or sheet of drywall on the studs. So layout was whatever they thought looked good at the time, okay? So you're gonna have a really difficult time fitting bats into the walls, okay? So sometimes it makes sense to use rigid board insulation, okay? And then there's a lot you can do. Obviously, it's the preferred choice for any sort of exterior insulation, okay? You can use rigid insulation in a slab. Like I said, you can use it on a roof deck, okay? And then there's a lot of different options, some of which I'm going to say you should really steer clear of this just because of the environmental impact, okay? But they're going to have different R values per inch, okay? R3 up to R6 per inch. And then the rigid boards are going to vary in thickness also. So you could get an R4 foam, or excuse me, a 4-inch thick foam that's R5 or R6 per inch, and bam, all of a sudden you're adding R20 to the outside of your house, okay? Now, that being said, you don't want to do that in every climate zone. There is such a thing as too much insulation, okay? So you got to be careful what you're doing. We only want to put 4 inches of foam on the outside of a house if we're in, Canada or something like that, okay? Otherwise, you could be creating a pretty dangerous assembly, okay? So we already kind of went over some of these foam materials in an earlier lecture. Expanded polystyrene, extruded polystyrene. XPS is the one that you really want to avoid if possible, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. And it's because of the blowing agents in it. They are, from what I understand, changing the blowing agents to make it a little more eco-friendly. But polyisocyanurate, this is the yellow foam with the aluminum face. This one's kind of the least evil foam boards, okay? And it also has the highest R value per inch also. But Gutex, we're going to talk about a little bit. Mineral wool, we'll talk a little bit. And so not only is it acting as an exterior insulation, breaking the thermal bridge, adding R value to the walls, it's also great at like dampening sound also, okay? Because sound's going to travel and vibrate through walls, and this just makes everything so much quieter. So Gutex is a product that I really like that we're using on the CR builds, and this is made from wood fiber, okay? It's a byproduct from the timber industry, and they sweep up all the dust off the floor, essentially, clean out all the planers, and compress it into these sheets. The really nice thing about this is that it is essentially, I mean, depending on how far it has to ship, I guess, but it's essentially carbon negative, okay? If we think about the environmental cost of a product, how much carbon goes into producing this material, this is carbon negative, okay? There were trees that were growing, pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. They got cut down. They're still storing that carbon dioxide. This is embodied carbon dioxide, okay? So it is, like we said, carbon negative, okay? Put this on the outside of the house. It is sequestering carbon dioxide. It's storing it, okay, preventing it from going into the atmosphere. So this product is R3.7 per inch. And this also comes in varying thicknesses also. We're using the 1 9/16, which I think is the smallest one they make, but they make up to like a 3-inch board. So you can get kind of a pretty significant R value out of this material. It is expensive. Okay, it's $1.81 per square foot at its most current price right now. It's expensive. Okay, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that much more to get a product that I feel is just kind of the right thing to do. Okay, and then the other thing about this is, so the way it gets its water resistance is it has like a paraffin wax treatment on the face that resists water. So in drier climates, this can also act as the WRB. Okay, you could install this and tape the seams, and it could be your WRB. Okay, it's not airtight; it wouldn't be your air barrier, but it could act as your weather-resistant barrier. All right. Mineral wool is another product that I really like, and I've got a video about how this is made also. But this is made from molten rocks. Okay, it's got a little bit higher R value. So, but similar to fiberglass, where they're taking glass and melting it down and extruding it into fibers, they're melting rocks and extruding that into fibers. Okay, so if you want to think about kind of the environmental cost of this material, it's great from the standpoint that we're using rocks. Okay, we're not causing a lot of damage getting rocks. Okay, a lot of this stuff is also made from byproducts of like mining also. Okay, rock dust, and there's a lot of junk essentially that they're using to make this product. But the environmental cost comes from having to recreate a volcano, essentially an artificial volcano, so that we can melt rocks and then extrude those fibers. Okay, so there's a lot of energy that goes into making this product, but then once the product is made, it's pretty inert. There's no like off gassing or pollutants or anything like that. Okay, and then I know that this company Rockwool is moving towards kind of more sustainable ways of producing the energy to melt rocks. Okay, so like I said, it's 4.2 per inch. You can get different thicknesses of this stuff. And one of the really cool things about this material is it's totally vapor open. Okay, unlike the rigid foam, which those materials are going to be vapor closed, which could be problematic. Gutex, very vapor open. Rockwool, very vapor open. Okay, moisture, fire resistant. It's a rock. This is not going to burn very readily. Okay, quite a bit cheaper than the Gutex, but still quite a bit more expensive than the foam. Foam's going to be real cheap. People are drawn to it because of that reason. Okay. One thing that I also really like about this stuff, since it's a rock and totally moisture resistant, this would be a great material for insulating like a slab or something like that. Okay. It's not going to have any effect if it gets water contact. Okay, if there's moisture wicking up through the slab, getting on this insulation, it's not going to affect it at all. Okay, and that's something I would say to kind of weigh against fiberglass, is if fiberglass insulation gets wet at all, it's effectively ruined forever. Okay, where this stuff can get wet, it can dry out, it's not a problem. Okay, they also make this in a bat. You can fit this stuff inside the cavities as well.